That's all good for everyone? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So welcome back to week two of the 28-day challenge. So it's good to see you guys again for week two. Last week we explored what metabolism was, and we talked about it as a system that regulates how our body converts food into energy and fuels our cells, and also helps to stabilize things like temperature and maintain vital processes in our body. And we also discussed that metabolism isn't fixed as well. It's actually responsive and it adapts to things like our activity levels, our hormones, stress levels, muscle mass, sleep, and also inflammation levels in the body. So this week we're taking that foundation knowledge of metabolism and we're going to be applying it to nutrition, as you can see from our slideshow here, because what you eat is essentially one of the most powerful ways to influence all of those systems. So today we'll break down a few things. So we'll break down obviously how we can preserve muscle using nutrition, which we talked about in week one as quite an essential thing because muscle is a very metabolically active tissue and it also helps to prevent a slow metabolism. And we will also talk about why protein affects our hunger hormones, muscle mass, cravings, and also insulin sensitivity. We'll also highlight how carbohydrates can influence our blood sugar levels, hormones, fat burning processes, and also sleep. And also how fiber and gut health actually have a connection to inflammation, insulin resistance, cravings, and also our hormones as well. And last but not least, how BeFit food actually aligns with these principles and removes a lot of the guesswork for you as an individual. So what we'll do today is we'll tie together the week two nutrition strategies back to week one's metabolism principles, and then you'll sort of see how everything sort of coexists and works together in unison. So this holistic view essentially is what will help you to create a lasting change to your metabolism. So we'll move on, obviously, to why preserving muscle actually matters. So in week one, we covered the idea that muscle is one of the most powerful drivers of metabolism. And we talked about how muscle mass can decline with age, especially during menopause, just due to the hormonal changes, and also how a lower muscle mass can slow down your metabolism. So muscle is actually a regulator of insulin sensitivity. So the more muscle that you have, the more likely your insulin sensitivity is likely to improve as well. And a lower muscle mass actually can slow down your metabolic rate because muscle is a metabolically active tissue, which means that you end up burning more energy even when you're resting if you have a higher muscle mass compared to an individual of the same weight with a lower muscle mass. So the loss of muscle mass can actually also increase inflammation levels as well, and it can also reduce our ability to produce energy in the body. So in week two, our nutrition strategy starts with essentially preserving and supporting muscle mass. So as I mentioned already, even when you're sitting, when you're sleeping or relaxing, your muscles are actively burning energy. And muscle tissue actually requires more energy to maintain than fat tissue. So that means, as I mentioned before, someone with a higher muscle mass can actually enjoy a bit more of a higher resting metabolic rate compared to someone with a lower muscle mass. And then with the insulin sensitivity side of things, muscle acts as a bit of a sponge for glucose. So every single time you eat carbohydrates, obviously that will convert into sugar. But if you have a higher muscle mass, that muscle will actually pull glucose out of your bloodstream and use it for energy or store it for later. So the more muscle you have, the more effective your body is actually at regulating blood sugar and also insulin levels as well. And as we've highlighted last week, better control over insulin can actually lead to fewer cravings, more stable energy levels, and also reduced inflammation as well. Most importantly, muscle actually helps us to support our strength and our mobility. So basically, from midlife and beyond, muscle becomes one of the strongest predictors of our independence long term. So good muscle mass can help us protect against falls risk, help us support our joint health, stabilize our posture, and also just make day-to-day tasks easier, like carrying groceries or walking up the stairs. And it's also connected to better improved cognitive function as well. So that means that can help us to be overall more independent with longer in life and also help us to reduce the risk of chronic diseases. And most importantly, as well, to protect against metabolic slowdown. So that means that when people reduce their calorie intake, the body can become very protective. So if protein intake is low or muscle mass is low, the body may end up breaking down muscle instead of fat, which in turn would slow down your metabolic rate. So preserving muscle helps us ensure that weight you actually lose is majority fat and not the lean tissue that keeps your metabolism going. So last week we talked about how metabolism is impacted by a lot of things, such as age, hormones, and stress, all of which can reduce our muscle mass and make it a bit harder to build. So this is why protein needs to be higher than what many people actually think. So what we're striving for, generally speaking, is about 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So this is a range that helps us to support preservation of muscle, and also hormonal regulation and metabolic stability, especially in the midlife sort of stage of our lifespan. And this is also the amount shown to help counteract any menopausal related muscle loss, age related muscle loss, and also stress related muscle breakdown as well. We also need higher needs during fat loss as well, because we explained that before long-term dieting can actually slow down our metabolism. So with the long-term diets and particularly with extreme calorie restrictions as well, those diets can often reduce muscle mass just due to insufficient amounts of protein. Most low-calorie diets actually do not meet that criteria of 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So when we eat a higher protein intake as part of our calorie deficit, this can actually help us prevent that metabolic slowdown as well. And also, we need higher requirements as part of the aging process. So, we've talked about how estrogen can decline during menopause, and that reduces our muscle building efficiency. So, older adults also, as well, in general, need more protein, not less, to help stimulate the same amount of muscle repair that younger adults actually achieve with smaller amounts. So these sort of protein ranges are not necessarily about people going to the gym or like bodybuilders, athletes, etc. It's more about supporting a healthy metabolism in the general population, supporting balanced hormones, and also helping stabilize our blood sugar and our appetite control, whilst also maintaining our muscle mass as well. In terms of protein, it's one of the most metabolically powerful nutrients that you can eat. And basically, every single point on this slide connects directly to what we reiterated in week one's presentation. So, protein is a nutrient that increases our satiety. So, that means it keeps us feeling fuller for longer and helps us reduce our hunger hormones like ghrelin, which we discussed last week when we talked about the impact of poor sleep on our appetite. And when protein is high, our cravings also naturally reduce. And one of the reasons why our cravings can naturally reduce is because of the stability in blood sugar levels that we experience when we have a higher protein intake. So in week one, we linked blood sugar to things such as, blood sugar fluctuations, I should reiterate, to things such as stress or fatigue and also inflammation as well. And protein helps us to prevent those blood sugar spikes and drops by essentially slowing down the absorption of carbohydrates in the blood. And in terms of supporting our muscle repair, this ties back to obviously how low muscle mass and aging can directly impact our metabolism. So we can only really repair and maintain our muscle mass when we have sufficient amino acids available throughout the day to support that. And to help boost the metabolic rate, what this refers to is that protein has one of the highest thermic effects in terms of nutrients. So that means that your body actually burns more calories digesting protein than it does digesting other nutrients such as carbohydrates or fats. And that's just literally just through eating and consuming. You don't need to be doing any additional activity to facilitate that. It's all just part of your body's natural digestive process. And in relation to stabilizing the blood sugar as well and increasing our satiety, as mentioned earlier, we can also help reduce cravings as well. So cravings tend to increase obviously with things like poor sleep, with stress levels, inflammation, and also insulin resistance. And protein can actually help to regulate these patterns by stabilizing our hormones and also our blood sugar levels. So when we are, I guess, talking about metabolic health, protein is one of the foundation nutrients to support improved metabolism. How we distribute protein across the day is also just as important as how much you eat. So what we are looking at in terms of distribution is roughly around, say, 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. So this is what we would consider to be sort of the optimal amount of protein to help stimulate muscle repair, but also to help facilitate all those things we mentioned before, like supporting increased satiety and blood sugar stabilization. So smaller amounts actually spread out throughout the day tend to do more for metabolism than one large hit at any particular time during the day. So 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, it might seem like a large amount, but as you can see with an example on screen with the breakfast menu item there, the French eggs, our French eggs menu item actually has 22.5 grams of protein in it. So essentially with our BeFit food meals, they would all essentially meet that criteria of roughly 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. So if you are using BeFit food, you'll be able to easily achieve that quantity of protein just with that one meal as well. And in terms of including protein at breakfast, this ties directly back to our cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone that tends to actually peak in the morning naturally. And the reason why that stress hormone peaks in the morning is essentially it just triggers us to wake up, right? Because back at basically evolutionally, we had the fight or flight sort of response. So cortisol is obviously a hormone that helps to trigger that. And when you have a low protein breakfast in the morning, cortisol can actually stay high, which therefore leads to those elevated cravings as well, and also potentially some unstable energy levels later in the day. So setting yourself up with a high protein breakfast essentially helps to stabilize your hormones for the rest of the day and leads to more regulated appetite control and also craving regulation as well. So in terms of protein snacking, this term actually refers to just not having small quantities of protein at dinner time, like essentially a snack size amount. So a lot of people tend to fear calories of an evening time, so they naturally may gravitate to lighter meals that are less satiating. So for example, just eating a salad, or maybe just eating something that's just like a piece of fruit, for example. So including protein, just like with all these meals, helps you to actually stabilize your cravings, your blood sugar levels, and also helps you to mitigate any late night sort of urges that may creep in as a result of not having sufficient amounts of protein. So that in turn will help us to regulate our calorie intake as well, because when you have late night urges to indulge in foods, they may often be of a discretionary nature. So that means that they tend to be more calorie dense, potentially higher in trans fats, added sugars, salt, and most likely will be a processed food, especially if it's happening late in the evening when you can't be bothered cooking or preparing something that's more nutritionally adequate. And in terms of supporting muscle protein synthesis throughout the day, so in week one, we obviously highlighted that muscle declines with age. So muscle protein synthesis becomes less responsive as we get older. So by spacing protein across the day and having that adequate spread of roughly 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, you keep your body in optimal repair state rather than back-ending or front-ending your protein intake at any point during the day. And as I mentioned briefly as well, one of the strengths, obviously, of the BeFit Food program is that it literally does this without you having to do any of the guesswork. So all our meals are considered high protein. So each meal contains roughly around 20 to 30 grams of protein, which hits that ideal amount for muscle repair and also stabilizing those hormones. When you follow a BeFit food menu plan, this helps you to balance your protein intake evenly across breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So this corrects one of the mistakes that people make, which we discussed last week, which is irregular eating patterns, and helps you to also develop a bit more of a structured eating pattern to stabilize your appetite, your energy levels, and also your hormones as well. We also have protein-rich snacks designed to support satiety as well. So that can sometimes help that mid-morning or mid-afternoon sort of craving or slump, which ties back to week one section on insulin resistance and also the blood sugar crashes. And more importantly, it prevents that under eating of protein, which a lot of people tend to engage in earlier in the day. And that's because, as I've highlighted earlier, that under eating protein or low protein breakfast can actually lead to more cravings and potentially overeating your portion sizes later in the evening. Now we'll move on to carbohydrates, which is obviously another important nutrient as well. A bit demonized now at the moment, potentially with a lot of different diets that are going around, but nonetheless still a nutrient worthwhile, I guess, being a bit more educated about as well in terms of its importance in metabolism. So when we look at carbohydrates, we need to look at how we choose our carbohydrates and also how we use these carbohydrates, because that's what can dramatically influence our metabolism. So low GI carbs or low glycemic index carbohydrates are important to prioritize because these are the carbohydrates that release energy a lot more slowly into the blood. So that essentially means that the blood sugar levels will not spike as rapidly compared to something that is the opposite of that, which is high GI or high glycemic index. So in week one, we obviously spoke about how those rapid blood sugar spikes lead to higher insulin levels, inflammation, cravings, and also energy slumps as well. So the low GI carbs that help to prevent that include things like whole foods, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and all those basically less processed varieties of carbohydrates. So our whole foods are essentially foods that will help us provide a variety of different nutrients, including vitamins and minerals, fiber, and also antioxidants that help us to reduce inflammation. And obviously, with our vegetables, our legumes, and our whole grains, due to the high fiber content, these help us to support our gut health, which helps us to influence our hormones, our cravings, our mood, and also our inflammation as well. And in terms of refined carbs and added sugars, these are basically, in a nutshell, the high GI or the high glycemic index carbs. So these are the types of carbohydrate-rich foods that will end up creating that blood sugar roller coaster, so to speak. So that rapid spike and that rapid drop. And that tends to be the action that drives our cravings, facilitates that sort of slump in energy or that fatigue that we experience soon after eating something, and also the abdominal fat storage, which all ties back to the symptoms of insulin resistance. And having a diet that is quite high carb, especially in the refined carbohydrates and the added sugars, will always trigger a greater spike in insulin as well. So, in terms of the distribution of carbohydrates across the day, this is something that is important to help support our metabolism, and it strongly also relates back to the hormonal rhythms that our body experiences as well. So in the morning, we discuss cortisol before peaking, obviously in the morning. So cortisol makes your body handle carbs a lot more effectively earlier in the day. So having some things earlier in the day in terms of carbohydrates, particularly the low GI carbs or something whole grain or even some vegetables if you prefer, can actually be an option for you to help, I guess, distribute the carbs a bit more evenly during the day. So before or after exercise is also another opportunity for you to implement carbohydrates. Exercise or physical activity in general is something that naturally improves our insulin sensitivity. So that means that the carbs that you eat won't spike your blood sugar level as much because your insulin is going to be a lot more responsive to that. So those carbs as well, particularly when you're exercising, will be used for fuel and recovery rather than being stored as fat, particularly if the exercise is also strength training as well. And when you have carbohydrates, pairing it with protein and fiber or a source of protein and fiber is always going to be important as well. And that is because protein and fiber, they both help slow down digestion, so that actually means that the blood sugar levels will not spike as rapidly as well compared to if you ate that carbohydrate in isolation. So if we use that little picture here as a reference, for example, instead of just eating a piece of whole grain toast, which is a low GI carb and definitely a better option compared to white toast, pairing it with something like the scrambled eggs, which is a source of protein, and then adding a slice, a few slices of avocado, which technically is both a fat source and also a fiber source. This meal itself is going to spike your sugar levels a lot less rapidly compared to if you just ate the toast by itself, or just had the toast, say, with just avocado, or just a toast with the eggs by itself. And also, as well, we want to be mindful of our carb intake late at night. So, we talked about how poor sleep increases ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So, a large intake of carbohydrates at night can actually disrupt our sleep and also raise our blood sugar, which can also obviously disrupt our sleeping habits, increase inflammation, and also lead to potential instability with our cravings the following day as well. And in terms of why carbohydrates are important, well, as I've mentioned, they are a bit demonized at the moment, but they still definitely serve a purpose as well in terms of our metabolic health. So, in terms of why carbs can make such a difference, they help us to reduce our cravings. So, carbs eaten early can support our blood sugar levels, reduce those late night or later in the day cravings, which directly tie back to regulating our hormones. And in terms of improving our energy levels, when eaten strategically, they can help prevent the afternoon crash, which we linked last week to both our stress hormones and poor sleep. And they can also help us support just our physical activity and our stamina, particularly when we're working out as well. It can help to support fat burning because lower carb intake at night can actually help your body access fat stores more easily during sleep, and then also prevent those afternoon crashes, which can lead to that overeating and the sugar cravings as well. So, in terms of improving sleep quality, a more stable blood sugar level at night can actually help to reduce that overnight waking, which we linked to cortisol, insulin, and also ghrelin as well. So there's many reasons as to why carbohydrates serve a purpose, but just like with anything, obviously the type that we eat is important because carbohydrates is a very generic umbrella term. And then also as well, the quantity that we consume and how we distribute it is also going to be important. Now, in terms of fiber, this is what I personally consider to be one of the most underrated metabolic tools, as it strongly connects to the gut and also inflammation themes that we discussed a bit earlier in this presentation and also last week as well. So, in a nutshell, we should all be striving to aim for around 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day, but I can rest assure you that most adults do tend to fall short of this target. So fiber helps us to stabilize our blood sugar levels. It supports our digestive health and it helps us to regulate our appetite as well. So 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day, it seems like a lot, but technically when you have a variety of plant foods, that can actually help you to achieve that. And that includes things basically shown on the screen there. So a lot of different fruits, a lot of different vegetables, legumes, lentils, beans, and pulses. They're a great source of fiber as well. And there's something that you can also use as a protein source to help you meet both fiber and also protein targets. Now, in terms of different types of fiber, this is something that is important as well because different types of fiber actually feed different gut bacteria and serve a different purpose in the body as well. So, as we covered in week one, gut health can actually affect our inflammation, our hormone levels, cravings, and even our mood as well. So, a mix of soluble and insoluble fiber is both important. Soluble fiber slows down sugar absorption and is often used to help support blood sugar levels. So sometimes diabetics can actually be taking a fiber supplement to help with their blood sugar levels. And also as well, in terms of soluble fiber, you may have seen it in the form of something like Metamucil or psyllium husk. Those are generally the most accessible ones that you will be able to find in a supermarket or a chemist setting. Insoluble fiber is the other type of fiber, which helps us to support digestion and also gut motility as well. So that essentially means that it helps keep things moving essentially in our gut and helps us to, just keep things a bit more regular in terms of our bowel movements. There is also another type of fiber, which I haven't listed here, but it is worthwhile noting as well. It's called resistant starch. So this is something that can be formed essentially when you cool down a carbohydrate food and then you end up reheating it. So during that process, resistant starch is created, and resistant starch, as its name suggests, is resistant to digestion. So that means that the carb content of whatever food you are eating can actually naturally reduce with the formation of that resistant starch. So altogether, these different types of fibers can help keep the metabolism functioning smoothly, whether it's through blood sugar control or just supporting gut health. So, in terms of the importance of fiber and gut health, week one, we talked about the inflammation, hormonal imbalance, and insulin resistance and how they can all slow down metabolism. So, fiber and gut health actually help us to address all of those factors as well. So, in terms of a healthy gut bacteria or gut flora, I guess, count, this helps us to reduce inflammatory markers. So, inflammation is a big driver of obviously a slow metabolism. Our insulin sensitivity can improve as well because better gut health or better gut bacteria variety can actually help to improve blood sugar control. Certain gut bacteria can also help produce GLP-1s as well, which is the fullness hormone. And then also by producing these short chain fatty acids, this actually helps us to nourish the gut lining and reduce inflammation, both in the body, but also directly in the gut as well. To support detoxification, this actually refers to obviously the body literally being more regular with the bowel movements and clearing the body of any sort of waste products that may build up during the day or over time, and also helps us to regulate our hormones as well. And a healthy gut definitely also helps us to reduce the risk of insulin resistance, fatty liver, and abdominal fat gain, as evidenced by different types of research over the years. So with BeFit food, our BeFit food meals naturally support gut health because we have a variety of different high fiber vegetables in each of our hot meals. So these help us to promote healthy digestion and support the lining whilst giving us a good balance of both soluble and insoluble fiber. We have prebiotic ingredients in there as well, which help us to feed our beneficial gut bacteria. So prebiotics are essentially food for the probiotics. So if you're not consuming adequate amounts of prebiotics, your probiotic count is always going to be directly affected as a result. And with the gut bacteria, as I've mentioned before, these play an important role in hormonal regulation, including improving insulin sensitivity. With the low inflammatory meals as well, we've talked about in week one how chronic inflammation is obviously a precursor for slower metabolism. This program helps us reduce the inflammatory load on our body by using a lot of anti-inflammatory ingredients like fiber and also a lot of unsaturated fats in there. And also with our balanced macronutrient profile, this helps us ensure that our blood sugar is stable, which helps us to support that gut hormone communication. And by supporting our blood sugar, you can see here that with our protein to carb ratio, it's either always 1 to 1 or less than that, which means that the carbohydrates, generally speaking, are not exceeding the protein count, which helps us to make sure that protein is a key focus of the meal and therefore stabilizing the blood sugar levels as a result. So when we tie together all these strategies, everything from week one and also from week two, in a nutshell, at least from today's presentation, these are the key sort of nutrition strategies to help you support your fat loss and also preserve your muscle mass. So eat protein at every single meal to protect your metabolism. And that will obviously mean that you're not back-ending or front-ending your protein. You're actually spreading it out evenly throughout the day for there to be the best impact on your metabolism. Choose low GI carbs where possible if you are consuming carbohydrates, as this will help you to support your energy levels more steadily and also prevent those rapid insulin spikes, which can lead to chronic inflammation, fatigue, and also cravings. Time your carbs early in the day to help you support your hormones and also your sleep. Prioritize fiber and also your gut health to help reduce your inflammation and continue to be regular with your bowel movements as well. Having structured meals helps us to avoid any confusion around our food intake and overcompensating or undercompensating throughout the day or throughout the week. And also, I didn't mention anything about water, but it's definitely a given that we need to be staying hydrated as well, because hydration is important for a lot of bodily processes like digestion and also just for maintaining our energy levels. Plus, being dehydrated can sometimes also be mistaken in the body for being hungry as well. So, a lot of the time, it's important to actually just have a glass of water when we start feeling that initial hunger pain, just to see if that is a sign of our dehydration kicking in as well. But these habits help us reinforce everything in terms of nutrition strategies and essentially what your metabolism needs to function at its best. So, in summary, nutrition is obviously one of the most powerful levers for improving metabolic health. And everything we've talked about essentially ties back to those triggers for a slow metabolism back in week one. So, protein obviously protects our muscle. Our carbs can influence our hormones and our sleep quality. Fiber supports our gut health and can help us reduce inflammation. Structured meals themselves help us to stabilize our appetite and therefore our insulin levels. And as I briefly mentioned, hydration helps us support our energy levels and also our digestion as well. So all these small little changes or daily changes that you can make can obviously create some big lasting changes that over time can definitely help to support a more healthy metabolic rate. All right, I'll pass it on to Kate for Q&A.
Thank you, Wendy. That was fantastic. Lots of great information. And just before we start, I want to remind everyone, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, please join the Facebook group. And if you're late to register, still complete your registration form for us, please. And don't forget to do your measurements when you start and send us your before and after photos if you'd like to go into the draw to win a voucher. Additionally, if you got a 14-day food and mood journal from BeFit Food, please make sure you're documenting all of your meals, your hydration, your energy, your compliance to the program as we go along. All of these tools will really help with getting the best results that you possibly can. And if you haven't booked your dietitian consultation, please make sure that you do that as well. Now, have we got any questions? So we've got one here. Will I meet the protein target eating BeFit food? And what if I'm exercising? Great question. So as Wendy said, your protein requirements are around 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo. Now that is of your ideal body weight. So you need to remember that if your goal is to lose X amount of weight, you should be setting your protein targets around the weight you want to achieve and preserving the muscle for the weight that you want to achieve. So in that case, if you're say your weight now might be 100 kilos and your target weight is 80 kilos, then you want 80 kilos times 1.2 up to 1.6. So even if you go somewhere in the middle at 1.5 grams of protein per kilo, at an 80 kilo weight, you're looking at around 120 grams of protein per day. So each of the BeFit Food meals, as Wendy said, are 20 to 30 grams of protein, plus the snacks, depending on what you choose, are somewhere from 5 to 27 grams of protein with our new protein booster that will be released next week. And what we encourage is it's often good to have your meal and snack together so that you've got a gap between your meals, because it's between meals where you're burning body fat that you're actually clearing glucose out of the bloodstream. You're putting ketones into the bloodstream for energy, which come from the breakdown of your body fat. So actually having 3 to 4 hours minimum between meals, depending on, what time you wake up and go to bed, it might be slightly longer than this, but really have that gap with no food, no carbohydrate between meals. Unless, of course, you're someone who gets hypoglycemic or low blood sugar levels between meals if you're exercising, or perhaps you have a bit of a crash in the afternoon. But this can often be corrected by really adjusting the timing of your meals and having the right things during your meals as well. And if you're exercising, there's plenty of protein in the meal still as well. So as Wendy said, you can adjust your snacks around your exercise if you think you need that little bit of a boost. But overall, if you get better regulation of your insulin levels, which is the fat storage hormone that comes between meals, then you'll get better regulation of your energy as well, because you won't have ups and downs in blood sugar levels, and the ketones will give you consistent energy throughout the day. So this is called mild nutritional ketosis, where your body breaks down fat as a fuel and it gives you lots of energy that goes to your brain, and it helps to keep you fueled between meals without relying on snacking. What are good sources of protein? So I'm a vegetarian. Can I eat plant sources? Yes. So we've got lots of BeFit Food vegan and vegetarian meals, so the 5 veg eggs at breakfast. The difference between our eggs and making them yourself is we actually have 4 eggs worth of protein in there. So you get 4 egg whites, 2 egg yolks. This is so that you get the maximum protein, over 20 grams of protein. And we don't want more than 2 egg yolks a day, according to the guidelines, in terms of not getting too much cholesterol from the eggs, even though they don't think that cholesterol in the diet is related to cholesterol in the human body. However, they are really high in saturated fat. You'll get all the fat soluble vitamins and the benefits from 1 to 2 yolks a day. So there's no need to have 4 whole eggs. So that extra egg white is going to just give you that boost in protein without the extra calories as well. So the egg whites are only around 30 calories a serve, whereas a whole egg can be up to 100 calories a serve. So it's a really energy efficient way to get protein in without all of the calories. That means you tuck into your body fat stores earlier to change your body composition. So how much of early weight loss is water versus fat? So the first 2 to 4 days when you go on BeFit food and you're getting into that stage of mild nutritional ketosis, which is when your carbohydrate stores in your muscles and your liver are starting to break down. For every gram of carbohydrate that you store, you're storing 2 grams of water. So you'll see a big change in water loss in the first couple of days. Once you've lost this, you are confidently then losing body fat, because if you keep your glycogen stores or your carbohydrate levels low in the diet, then your body is forced to burn body fat. And unlike a really high fat keto diet, because BeFit food only uses olive oil and moderate amounts of healthy fats, then you burn your body fat rather than fueling your body with fat that it burns from food, and then you don't burn body fat at all. So our goal is to get your carbohydrates to a really good level. Make sure you have enough protein to maintain body muscle mass, and then burn your own body fat rather than over fueling fat as an energy source, because it's very calorie dense as well. So yeah, the first 2 to 3 kilos is your water mass, and then after that you're into body fat. And that's why we recommend trying to do a minimum of a 14-day reset, because you'll find then after the first couple of kilos and you're really getting into body fat stores. And you can check this by doing body composition analysis. So you might have access to body composition scales you could use. You might be able to get a DEXA scan. You might be able to use a bod pod, and even actually taking your measurements, so your girth measurements around your waist is really important as well, because if you start losing mass or centimeters around your waist, you know that you're burning body fat, because that is not where we're storing water. We're storing body fat there. So that's a really good measurement as well. Should I push through hunger, or is it a sign to adjust? Most of the time, I'd say it's if you're feeling hungry between meals, it's because your blood sugar levels are not well regulated, and your insulin levels, or fasting insulin or insulin between meals, the fat storage hormone, is too high. So after those first 2 to 4 days of our metabolism reset, what you'll find is you start to actually regulate your glucose levels better, which then helps you to burn body fat. And once you're burning body fat, you will get ketones in the body. So that's the side effect of burning body fat. Those ketones go to the brain and they actually suppress appetite. So particularly after the first sort of 2 to 4 days, your ketone levels will be up, and that will suppress your appetite at a brain level. Now, if you were to have something outside of the BeFit food meals and recommended extras that was high carbohydrate, you actually break that ketosis pattern, which will then make you hungry, because you'll get a surge of insulin again, and you'll need to go through that 2 to 3 days of reducing the carbohydrate again to get the higher ketone levels to suppress the appetite, which will then help you to get through the rest of the program and burn body fat. So at the end of your 2 weeks or your 28 days on BeFit food, you will have a significant amount of body fat that you're burning. So it's not just water mass or lean body mass. We're preserving muscle and we are targeting body composition and body fat levels specifically, and particularly abdominal fat, which is linked to diabetes, heart disease, and lots of other chronic health conditions. Even the top 13 cancers are linked to body fat levels. How do I know which fruit and veg are lower in carbohydrate and low GI? So in the BeFit Food recommended extras list, we put exactly which fruit and veg we recommend and how much of each as well. So you certainly don't want to be going and having a whole bag of grapes, because it's not just the glycemic index of the food, it's the glycemic load of the food, which is the carbohydrates in that amount of food times the glycemic index. So use our recommended extras sheet, and that will tell you exactly which types of low starch veggies, salads, and fruits you should be focusing on, and anything that's not on that list having very small amounts, because it may affect your results and increase your insulin and fat storage and reverse that ketosis that we want to get you into for body composition changes. So what is more important in my results, the scales or the body measurements? I would always say the body measurements, because if you are losing body measurements in centimeters, fat is stored under the skin, subcutaneous fat. So if your measurements are coming down, you are definitely reducing your body fat levels. Whereas when you're on the scales, you can often just be seeing water changes. But even when you're building muscle, you will find most of the time, if you're losing body fat and building muscle, your body becomes tighter and leaner. So you'll even see your body measurements go down, even if you're gaining muscle. So your measurements is the best way to measure changes in fat mass, and actually that toning up and that increase in muscle will often show as a reduced girth, because when we store muscle, it's really dense, like a shot put. So it's tight and it's small and it's very heavy on the scales. Whereas when we store fat, it's big and it's empty and it takes up a lot of space, like a basketball. So if you were standing on the scales and gaining fat, you would not see a change on the scales very much. You would see, if I passed you a basketball, there'd only be a couple of 100 grams change. Whereas if I gave you a shot put, because you're gaining muscle and losing fat, you would actually see the scales go up. So the scales are a very unreliable predictor for looking at change in body composition, particularly short term. In the long term, they tend to be quite good, because you can see over a few weeks or a month some changes, but it really will be how your clothes fit. And if your clothes are getting looser, you can guarantee you're actually losing body fat there. And if you're having enough protein, you're preserving muscle. But to actually preserve the muscle well, you need to stimulate it. So the most important thing you can do is make sure you stay active, whether that means just getting your 10,000 steps a day or actually doing some resistance training. Even if that resistance training starts with push-ups on the wall or push-ups on your knees, or doing some squats up and down off your chair, but doing any sort of strength training at least two to three times a week for 20 to 30 minutes will actually help stimulate that muscle so that you keep that better as well. A new study came out only last month, I think it was, that actually showed the link between hydration and having enough water and actually preserving muscle mass. Because if you're putting all this protein in and you're very dehydrated, if your circulation is poor, then you cannot get the amino acids, so the breakdown of protein, to the muscles to nourish and preserve and repair them. So hydration is really important for actually preserving muscle mass, as well as what Wendy mentioned in terms of satiation and feeling full and satisfied, because sometimes we mistake our thirst for hunger. And by the time you are thirsty, you're about 2% dehydrated. And each percent of dehydration actually relates to around 5% of cognitive decline. So by the time you are thirsty, you may have lost 10% of your overall functioning. So it's important not to wait until you're thirsty to start drinking water. Last question. Why is it important to stay hydrated on the challenge? Can I still drink coffee? So I think we've answered most of that now. So the hydration will keep the metabolic rate going. It'll help you actually get rid of your ketones as well. So when you're burning fat, the ketones are an acid that build up in the bloodstream. They're used as energy, but we also wee them out. And if you're not drinking enough, the ketones can cause a headache. They can cause you to have really concentrated urine as well and really smelly breath. So make sure that you're drinking lots of water to flush them as well. And can you have coffee? Yes, you can have coffee and tea. If you're having it black, no issues at all. If you're having a dash of milk, completely fine. But if you like a milky coffee, then count that as one of your snacks, your protein snacks in your recommended extras. So each cup of milk, so a lower calorie sort of skimmer milk, will be high in protein and reasonably low in calories. So you can use that as a protein snack. So if you were to have 2 coffees over the day, use 1 cup of milk between the 2, and that is one of your recommended extra protein snacks that you can have throughout the day. Any other questions? No? Thank you, everyone, and I hope you got lots of information, and don't forget to book in with Wendy if you haven't done so already, and we will see you next week. Good luck.